Picture this. A quiet neighborhood in Buenos Aires, 1960. A man steps off the bus after his shift at the Mercedes-Benz factory, carrying flowers for his wife. He's just an ordinary German immigrant named Ricardo Clement, right? Wrong. Within minutes, he'll be grabbed by a team of secret agents, drugged, smuggled onto a plane, and flown halfway across the world to face trial for organizing the murder of 6 million people. Because Ricardo Clement isn't who he says he is. His real name is Adolf Eichmann, and he's been missing for 15 years. But here's what will really shock you. He's just one of 3 high-ranking Nazi officers we're going to tell you about today. Men who vanished after World War II and were found alive decades later, living under false names, building new lives, and believing they'd gotten away with it. One was caught and executed. One escaped justice entirely and died a free man. And one lived openly for 50 years before anyone did anything about it. These aren't stories of heroic survival or innocent men caught in the fog of war. These are stories of men who ran, men who hid, and men whose pasts eventually caught up with them in the most dramatic ways imaginable. So let's dive into these 3 incredible true stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice, identity, and whether anyone can truly escape their past. Our first story begins with understanding exactly who Adolf Eichmann was and why his disappearance mattered so much. Born in 1906 in Solingen, Germany, Eichmann wasn't a soldier or a general. He was a bureaucrat, a middle-ranking SS officer with a particular talent for organization and logistics. And that talent made him one of the most dangerous men in history. You see, Eichmann was put in charge of what the Nazis called the Jewish department of the SS. And his job was to organize the deportation of millions of Jews from across Europe to concentration camps and extermination centers. He coordinated train schedules, managed logistics, and made sure the machinery of genocide ran smoothly and efficiently. He called it evacuation. The world would later call it the Holocaust. By the time the war ended, Eichmann had played a central role in the systematic murder of 6 million Jews. He wasn't the one pulling triggers or operating gas chambers, but without his organizational genius, the Holocaust couldn't have happened on the scale it did. He was the man who made the impossible logistics of mass murder possible. So when the Third Reich collapsed in April 1945, Eichmann knew exactly what was coming. He'd seen the writing on the wall. The Allies were closing in, and men like him would be hunted down and hanged. So he did what any desperate war criminal would do. He ran. After Germany's surrender, Eichmann was briefly captured by American forces. But here's the thing. They didn't know who they had. In the chaos of millions of displaced persons flooding across Europe, with documentation destroyed and records scattered, Eichmann gave them a false name, Otto Eckmann, and claimed to be a low-ranking soldier. The Americans, overwhelmed and without proper records to verify his identity, had no idea they were holding one of the architects of the Holocaust. And Eichmann, seeing his opportunity, escaped from the detention camp and went underground. For 5 years, from 1945 to 1950, Adolf Eichmann simply vanished. He lived in hiding in Germany, working as a lumberjack and farmhand under various aliases, moving frequently, keeping his head down, and waiting for the world to stop looking for him. And then, in 1950, he made his move. With the help of a network of Nazi sympathizers, including allegedly Catholic clergy who provided false papers through what became known as rat lines, Eichmann obtained a Red Cross travel document under the name Ricardo Clement. In July 1950, he boarded a ship bound for Argentina, and just like that, one of the world's most wanted war criminals disappeared into South America. Now, you might be wondering why Argentina? Well, at the time, Argentina was essentially a haven for fleeing Nazis. President Juan Perón's government was sympathetic to fascist refugees, and the country's large German immigrant community provided perfect cover. Thousands of former Nazis settled there, blending seamlessly into the population, and the Argentine government asked very few questions. Eichmann arrived in Buenos Aires and started building his new life as Ricardo Clement. He worked odd jobs at a laundry, then a water company, and eventually landed that position at the Mercedes-Benz factory. He lived modestly, almost invisibly, in a working-class neighborhood. In 1952, his wife Vera and their 3 sons joined him, traveling under false names. For 10 years, Adolf Eichmann lived as Ricardo Clement, speaking Spanish, working an ordinary job, and raising his family. He had a new identity, a new life, and every reason to believe he'd successfully escaped justice. But someone was looking for him, and the way they found him is absolutely incredible. The hunt for Adolf Eichmann never really stopped. Nazi hunters, including the legendary Simon Wiesenthal, had been tracking leads for years, following tips across Europe and South America, but every trail seemed to go cold. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source imaginable: a teenage romance. In 1956, a young German Jewish woman named Sylvia Hermann was living in Buenos Aires with her family. She started dating a boy named Klaus Eichmann, and Klaus would sometimes make disturbing comments, boasting about his father's Nazi past and making anti-Semitic remarks. Sylvia's father, Lothar Hermann, was a half-blind concentration camp survivor, and when his daughter told him about Klaus and his father, Ricardo, something clicked in his mind. Hermann began investigating on his own, watching the Clement house, gathering information, and piecing together clues. And in 1957, he sent a letter to Fritz Bauer, a prosecutor in Germany who was known for aggressively pursuing Nazi war criminals. Bauer took the tip seriously. But here's where it gets interesting. He didn't trust German intelligence agencies because he feared Nazi sympathizers within those organizations might tip off Eichmann. So Bauer did something extraordinary. He contacted Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, and told them he might have found Adolf Eichmann. Mossad sent agents to Argentina to verify the lead, and what followed was one of the most remarkable intelligence operations of the Cold War era. The agents surveilled the house on Garibaldi Street for months, photographing Ricardo Clement, comparing his features to old photos of Eichmann, and looking for any definitive proof. The ears matched, the facial structure matched, the age was right. But they needed to be absolutely certain before they could act. One agent followed Clement home from work one evening and noticed he was carrying flowers. The agent noted the date, March 21st. They checked the records, and March 21st, 1906 was Adolf Eichmann's birthday. That was enough. The decision was made to capture him. On May 11, 1960, a team of Mossad agents waited near the bus stop where Clement got off every evening after work. As he walked toward his house on that quiet street, they grabbed him, bundled him into a car, and drove him to a safe house. There, confronted with evidence and surrounded by Israeli agents, Eichmann admitted who he was. 9 days later, drugged and disguised as an airline crew member, Adolf Eichmann was smuggled onto an El Al flight and flown to Israel. The man who had disappeared for 15 years, who had built an entire new life as Ricardo Clement, was finally found. The announcement sent shockwaves around the world. Argentina protested the violation of its sovereignty. The United Nations got involved. But Israel proceeded with the trial, and Eichmann's trial in Jerusalem in 1961 became a global sensation. For the first time, the world heard detailed, heartbreaking survivor testimony about the Holocaust, broadcast on television and radio. Eichmann sat in a bulletproof glass booth, showing little emotion throughout the proceedings, and his defense was simple. He was just following orders. He claimed he was a small cog in a large machine, that he had no choice, that he was simply doing his job. The judges didn't buy it. The evidence was overwhelming. Eichmann had enthusiastically embraced his role, had gone beyond his orders, and had shown no mercy even when he had opportunities to do so. He was convicted of crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes against the Jewish people. On May 31, 1962, Adolf Eichmann was hanged. His body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered at sea, outside Israeli waters, so there would be no grave, no shrine, no trace of him left on earth. The man who disappeared into Argentina as Ricardo Clement was gone for good. But his story raises a question. If Eichmann could hide for 15 years, who else got away? Well, let me tell you about a man who hid even longer and never faced justice at all. Our second story is darker, more elusive, and it ends not with a trial, but with a grave that took 6 years to find. This is the story of Josef Mengele, known as the Angel of Death of Auschwitz, and the decades-long hunt that always seemed to be one step behind. Josef Mengele was born in 1911 in Günzburg, Bavaria, into a wealthy family that owned a successful farm equipment manufacturing company. He was educated at some of Germany's finest universities, cultured, and held doctorates in both anthropology and medicine. On paper, he was the model of German academic achievement. In reality, he was a monster. In 1943, Mengele was assigned to Auschwitz concentration camp as a physician, but he wasn't there to heal anyone. He was there to experiment, to pursue his twisted research into genetics and racial theory, using human beings as laboratory animals. Mengele stood on the selection ramp as trains arrived at Auschwitz, deciding with a casual flick of his hand who would live as slave labor and who would go straight to the gas chambers. Survivors remembered him whistling opera as he worked, impeccably dressed, almost cheerful as he sent thousands to their deaths. But his true horror was in the medical block. Mengele conducted grotesque experiments on prisoners, especially twins, dwarfs, and children. He was obsessed with twins, believing they held secrets to creating a master race. He injected chemicals into children's eyes to try to change their color, often causing blindness and excruciating pain. He performed surgeries without anesthesia, dissected living subjects, and even attempted to create conjoined twins by sewing children together. He treated human beings like laboratory rats, and he did it all with meticulous scientific documentation, as if he were conducting legitimate research. Thousands died because of him, and those who survived his experiments were left with physical and psychological scars that lasted their entire lives. When the Soviet army approached Auschwitz in January 1945, Mengele fled, taking his research notes with him as evidence of what he considered his scientific achievements. And then he simply vanished into the chaos of collapsing Germany. Here's what's astonishing. Unlike Eichmann, Mengele was never captured by the Allies, not even briefly. He hid in plain sight, working as a farmhand in Bavaria under his own name. Incredibly, he was even briefly detained by American forces in 1945 for a routine check, but they didn't realize who he was, and he was released. The Americans were looking for SS officers with blood-type tattoos, but Mengele had never gotten his tattoo, a stroke of luck that saved him. By 1949, as the Nuremberg trials brought Nazi atrocities into sharp focus and the net began to tighten around war criminals, Mengele decided it was time to run. Using the same rat line networks that helped Eichmann, Mengele obtained false papers under the name Helmut Gregor and sailed to Argentina in 1949, a full year before Eichmann made the same journey. In Buenos Aires, Mengele lived comfortably, far more comfortably than Eichmann ever did. His wealthy family sent him money regularly, and he even used his real name at times, feeling safe in Perón's Argentina. He socialized with other Nazi exiles, worked briefly as a carpenter, and later bought a share in a pharmaceutical company. For over a decade, Josef Mengele lived openly, almost arrogantly, in Buenos Aires. But after Eichmann's dramatic capture in 1960, everything changed. Mengele panicked. If Mossad could find Eichmann, they could find him. And unlike Eichmann, Mengele knew his crimes were even more personal, even more horrific. He fled Argentina, moving first to Paraguay in 1959, where he obtained citizenship under a false name, then to Brazil in 1960. In Brazil, he went deeper underground than he'd ever been before. He lived under the name Peter Hochbichler, then Wolfgang Gerhard, moving between safe houses and staying with sympathetic German expatriates who either didn't know who he was or didn't care. He grew increasingly paranoid, isolated, and bitter. The world was looking for him. Nazi hunters had his name at the top of their lists. Governments offered substantial rewards for information leading to his capture. Mossad agents were reportedly close multiple times, following leads across South America. But Mengele, through a combination of luck, help from sympathizers, and his own paranoia-fueled caution, always managed to slip away. He lived in poverty compared to his earlier life, moving from farm to farm, growing old and sick, but always free. And then, on February 7, 1979, something unexpected happened. Josef Mengele went swimming at a beach in Bertioga, Brazil. He was 67 years old, living under the name Wolfgang Gerhard, staying with friends who knew his real identity but protected him anyway. While swimming, he suffered a stroke and drowned. His friends pulled his body from the water, but it was too late. They buried him under his false name, Wolfgang Gerhard, in a cemetery in Embu das Artes, a suburb of São Paulo. They told no one who he really was. And for 6 more years, the world kept searching for a man who was already dead. Nazi hunters followed leads. Mossad investigated tips. Journalists wrote articles speculating about his whereabouts. Some said he was in Paraguay. Others claimed he was in Chile or even back in Europe. The hunt for Josef Mengele became one of the most famous manhunts in history, and all the while he was lying in an unmarked grave in Brazil. The truth finally emerged in 1985, and the way it happened is fascinating. German police, following a lead, raided the home of a Mengele associate in Günzburg, his hometown. They found letters, diaries, and documents that pointed to Brazil and suggested Mengele might be dead. Brazilian authorities were contacted, and they exhumed the grave of Wolfgang Gerhard. Forensic experts examined the remains, comparing the skull to photographs of Mengele, analyzing bone structure and dental records. Everything was consistent with Mengele's physical characteristics and age. But there were doubters. Some survivors and Nazi hunters believed it was a hoax, that Mengele had faked his death. So in 1992, DNA testing was performed using blood samples from Mengele's son. The results confirmed it beyond any doubt. The body in that grave was Josef Mengele. He had been found, but he'd been dead for 13 years. He never faced trial. He never answered for his crimes in a courtroom. He never heard the testimony of his victims. He died a free man on a beach far from justice. Mengele's story is fundamentally different from Eichmann's, and that difference matters. Eichmann was caught, tried, and executed. Justice, however delayed, was ultimately served. But Mengele escaped completely. He lived for 34 years after the war ended, and he died of natural causes while swimming. That haunts us. It's a reminder that not every story has a satisfying ending, that not every monster faces judgment, that sometimes the bad guys just get away. And it raises uncomfortable questions about justice and closure. Is it enough to know what happened to him, even if he never faced trial? Do we find any comfort in knowing he spent his final years in poverty and paranoia? Or does the fact that he never answered for his crimes in a courtroom represent a fundamental failure of justice? These are questions without easy answers. But there's one more story to tell, and this one might be the most frustrating of all, because this is about a man who didn't really hide at all. Our final story takes us to the mountains of Argentina, to a picturesque town called San Carlos de Bariloche. It's a tourist destination, known for skiing, chocolate shops, and stunning alpine scenery that looks like it was transplanted from Switzerland. And for 50 years, it was home to a man named Erich Priebke. He wasn't hiding in the shadows like Mengele. He wasn't living under a carefully constructed false identity like Eichmann. He ran a delicatessen called Almacen Priebke, using his real name. He was active in the local German community. He gave interviews to journalists. Everyone knew he was there, and for decades, no one did anything about it. Let me tell you why that's so shocking. Erich Priebke was born in Berlin in 1913 and joined the SS in 1936, rising to the rank of Hauptsturmführer, which is equivalent to captain. During World War II, he was stationed in Rome as part of the Gestapo, and in March 1944, he participated in one of the war's most notorious atrocities, the Ardeatine Massacre. Here's what happened. On March 23, 1944, Italian partisans attacked a column of German police in Rome, killing 33 soldiers with a bomb. Adolf Hitler was furious and demanded immediate retaliation. He ordered a reprisal that would send a message: 10 Italians executed for every German killed. That meant 330 people had to die, though the final count would be 335. The task fell to the SS in Rome, including Erich Priebke. On March 24, 1944, 335 Italian prisoners, a mix of civilians, partisans, and Jews, were taken to the Ardeatine caves outside Rome. They were forced to kneel in the caves, and SS officers shot them in the back of the head, one by one, execution style. Priebke personally checked names off a list and shot at least 2 prisoners himself. He would later claim he had to do it to avoid being shot for disobedience, the same defense Eichmann used. After all 335 men were dead, the caves were dynamited to seal the bodies inside. It became known as the Ardeatine Massacre, one of the worst atrocities committed in Italy during the war. After the war ended, Priebke was captured by British forces and held in a prisoner of war camp in Italy. But in 1946, just like Eichmann, he escaped. With help from the rat line networks, Priebke made his way to Argentina in 1948, traveling under the alias Otto Pape. He settled in Bariloche, attracted by its large German-speaking population and remote location in the Andes Mountains. And then he did something remarkable. He stopped hiding. He opened his delicatessen and butcher shop, and he used his real name, Erich Priebke. He married, raised a family, and became a respected member of the community. He joined the German social club. He attended church. He lived a completely normal public life. For nearly 50 years, Erich Priebke lived openly in Bariloche. And here's the part that will make your blood boil. People knew who he was and what he'd done. In the 1970s, Nazi hunters identified Priebke's location and published his whereabouts. His name appeared in books and reports about Nazi war criminals living in South America. Journalists visited him in Bariloche and wrote articles about him. He didn't deny who he was or what he'd done. He just lived his life, apparently confident that Argentina would never extradite him and that Italy had forgotten about him. And for decades, he was right. Then, in 1994, something changed. American television journalist Sam Donaldson traveled to Bariloche to interview Priebke for ABC News. Priebke, now 81 years old, agreed to the interview. On camera, in his home, Priebke admitted his role in the Argentina massacre. He showed no remorse. He said he was following orders, that he had no choice, that it was war. He was calm, matter-of-fact, almost casual about describing how he checked names off a list while men were executed. The interview aired on ABC's Primetime Live and was broadcast worldwide. And finally, after 50 years, the world reacted. The public outcry was immediate and intense. How could this man have lived freely for half a century? How could he give interviews admitting to war crimes and face no consequences? Italy, facing enormous pressure from survivors' groups and the international community, formally requested Priebke's extradition. Argentina, also under pressure and embarrassed by the attention, arrested Priebke in November 1995. After a legal battle, he was extradited to Italy in 1995 to stand trial for his role in the Argentina massacre. The trial was a media spectacle. Priebke, now 82 years old, sat calmly in the courtroom, showing little emotion as survivors testified about the massacre and its aftermath. He admitted his actions but maintained he had no choice, that he was following orders, that he would have been shot if he refused. In 1996, he was initially sentenced to 15 years in prison, but the sentence was reduced due to his age and time already served, and incredibly, he was ordered released. When the verdict was announced, riots broke out in Rome. Survivors and their families were outraged. The case was retried amid the public fury. In 1998, Priebke was convicted again in a second trial and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, due to his advanced age, he was allowed to serve his sentence under house arrest in Rome rather than in prison. He lived there in a guarded apartment under constant police protection because of threats against his life until his death in 2013 at the age of 100. Even in death, Priebke remained controversial. The Catholic Church refused to hold a funeral mass for him in Rome. His hometown in Germany refused to accept his body. Argentina refused to take him back. Eventually, he was buried in a secret location to prevent his grave from becoming a neo-Nazi shrine. Priebke's story is perhaps the most frustrating of the three we've discussed today. Eichmann was hunted down and caught in a dramatic operation. Mengele escaped but died in hiding, paranoid and isolated. But Priebke lived openly for 50 years, running a business, raising a family, giving interviews, and facing no consequences until a television broadcast finally sparked enough outrage to force action. It raises the most uncomfortable question of all. How many others lived like Priebke? How many men with blood on their hands simply retired to quiet lives in South America or elsewhere, and nobody ever came for them? So what do we take away from these three extraordinary stories? Adolf Eichmann, the bureaucrat who organized genocide, hunted down and executed. Josef Mengele, the doctor who tortured children, who escaped justice entirely and died free. And Erich Priebke, the officer who lived in plain sight for 50 years before finally facing trial. 3 men, 3 different endings, but one common thread. They all ran, they all hid, and they all believed they could outrun their past. These stories force us to confront some uncomfortable truths about justice, memory, and human nature. First, justice is not inevitable. It's not automatic. It requires people who refuse to forget, who keep searching, who keep demanding accountability even decades after the crimes were committed. Mengele died without ever answering for his crimes. Priebke lived freely for half a century. The machinery of justice is slow, bureaucratic, and sometimes it fails entirely. Second, the world is simultaneously smaller and bigger than we think. Eichmann thought he was safe in Argentina, living as Ricardo Clement in a working-class neighborhood. Mengele thought he could disappear into the vastness of Brazil. But tips, photographs, and persistent investigators eventually found them, or at least found the truth about what happened to them. Yet at the same time, vast networks of sympathizers helped these men escape and hide for decades. The rat lines that smuggled them out of Europe, the communities that sheltered them in South America, the officials who looked the other way, all of these enabled their escapes and made justice harder to achieve. Third, and perhaps most importantly, memory matters. The reason these men were hunted at all is because people refused to forget. Survivors like Lothar Hermann, who recognized the signs and tipped off authorities about Eichmann. Nazi hunters like Simon Wiesenthal, who dedicated their lives to tracking down war criminals and never stopped searching. Journalists like Sam Donaldson, who brought Priebke's story to the world and sparked the outrage that finally led to his extradition. These people kept the past alive, and that mattered. It's easy to say, let the past be the past, or it was so long ago, what's the point? But these stories show us why we can't do that. Because if we forget, if we stop caring, then men like Eichmann, Mengele, and Priebke win. They get away with it. They live out their lives in peace while their victims are forgotten. And that's unacceptable. Today, the generation that lived through World War II is nearly gone. The survivors, the soldiers, the witnesses, they're in their 90s and hundreds now, and soon there will be none left who remember these events firsthand. But their stories remain, preserved in testimony, in documents, in trials, and in videos like this one. Stories like these, of men who disappeared and were found decades later, remind us that history doesn't end when the war does. The choices we make echo forward through time. The crimes we commit don't vanish just because we change our names and move to another country. And sometimes, even after 30, 40, 50 years, the past catches up. Sometimes justice is served, like with Eichmann. Sometimes it fails, like with Mengele. And sometimes it comes so late that it feels almost meaningless, like with Priebke. But the pursuit matters. The refusal to forget matters. The insistence that crimes must be answered for, even decades later, that matters. These three stories of Adolf Eichmann, Josef Mengele, and Erich Priebke are testaments to both the persistence of justice and its limits. They show us the best and worst of human nature, the people who dedicate their lives to finding the truth and holding criminals accountable, and the people who help monsters escape and hide. They remind us that the past is never really past, that it shapes our present and our future in ways we don't always recognize. And they challenge us to think about what we owe to history, to victims, and to the truth. If you found these stories as fascinating and troubling as I did, if you think more people need to hear about these incredible true events, then show this video some love and consider joining our community where we explore more hidden histories and untold stories that deserve to be remembered. Because remembering, as these three cases prove, is how we ensure that justice, however imperfect and delayed, remains possible.